Before we go into some of the some of the questions I want to ask around, and fundamentally, obviously, I'm a bit of I like data, so the sort of conversation we've just been talking about can be really important going into the next few sort of subjects. But I'm quite interested in, because you've had this, so still staying quite high. You've had obviously a really interesting career in the sense of you've like you've said, and like I said, you've got all three parts of the pie, really. From the tech to the to the policy making and obviously the educationalist in you as well, the headships and so on. Do you find then, so I've sort of alluded to it, I suppose, by saying it gives you all those different angles, but do you take that into, is there ways of taking that into your headship?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing to say about each of those roles is the privilege of having any of them. I just need to make that really clear. So, from the point where you're a teacher, starting off as a teacher, you wonder how you're going to survive. I think all teachers probably go through that, and you're up late marking and all preparing and so on. But after a while, when that starts to be more comfortable, I think probably all teachers, I certainly did, go through that point of saying, oh well, this is a really privileged job. As a classroom teacher, I might have, I don't know, 150 pupils. I'm there for their care, there for their learning, their progress, and so on, as part of that bigger package. So, I certainly remember feeling that after I've been a teacher for a little while. And of course, when you move up through school leadership, you just feel that more acutely. So I've got 1,200 pupils, 140 members of staff, I think. And then, more if you think about the schools in our trust as well, where we're definitely not a sort of a one school outfit. We're really thinking about pupils in the town, in our primary school and our 2 secondary schools, all the time. And I'm acutely aware of the fact that, trustees, parents, pupils are putting their trust in me to do that. And the sense of privilege behind that is astonishing. I think, it is a privilege. But the other jobs, I mean, sort of working with you again, it's a privilege to have schools and school leaders, support teams, listen to what you were saying and sort of confide in you. So that was a real eye-opener, and being able to work with lots and lots of schools, whatever setting, and not necessarily where you and I were, but any setting, the opportunity to work with lots of schools is always to be seized, I would say, whatever you do in the education landscape. Really important. And then at Askell, I mean, so I sort of I lost track of how many times I would have gone to the DFE, but every single time, sort of crossing the threshold, I'm thinking, well, there are 18,000 or 19,000 school leaders who put their trust in me to represent their case, their views, and so on. Blimey, so that's a big, well, not a burden, but a big, huge responsibility. So they've all had real privilege, but they're still all when it comes down to it, actually having the young people in front of you, I think is the most privileged of all. But the sort of the policy job at Askell, I suppose, meant that it was possible, I think, to get a fairly clear view about what was happening in the system. So if you look at the link from policy through to school leaders and impact on children and what they're learning, certainly when it comes to data, it was about I firmly believe that schools were being driven down a route of using data for the wrong thing, really.
Yeah.
It was about sort of fueling the needs of accountability, if you like. It was very data heavy, as you know. A little bit less so now, fortunately, I think, because of the new Ofsted framework. But nevertheless, what data was available was often being used to understand progress 8 or value added or whatever, in a way that wasn't, in fact, the right thing to really be looking at. And the best piece of work, the best policy work that came from Askell during my time there, I think, was 2015, I think it was, which was the blueprint for school-led self-improving system. That's when that sort of language of, you know, this, what does a school-led system look like?
Yeah.
And it was an attempt to sort of try and define that a bit, and also to try and define who should be doing what in a school-led system. So, you know, if and its starting point was actually, we probably reached a point in our jurisdiction, when considered alongside other, you know, jurisdictions, where anything top down that the government tries to do to the system is sort of counterproductive, actually. And you know, we can think through many instances where governments have thrown something at the system.
Yeah.
You know, levels of progress is one that you can think of, and national strategies, and there's, you know, there's dozens of them, aren't there? And ultimately they tend to fail, I think, because the system isn't that bad, if you like, that it needs those strategies. Other jurisdictions might need that approach, but the thesis of the blueprint really was that the system's as good as it's going to be by virtue of anything central that can be done to it. Excuse me. The next step needs to be schools working together to push for the next bit of improvement. So if you like, government steps back, actually, school leaders take the initiative. And you've got some examples of that. You've got teaching school alliances and now new hubs as an example of that. But that's where my interest, I think, in schools and their data sort of came to be, because, you know, I had a hand in writing a bit about accountability, and that's where, you know, where it says, and I still believe very much that the data that you've got isn't about your progress A to reback or whatever. It really needs to be about the children that you've got in front of you and what do you do for their learning, you know, and their outcomes while you've still got them. If you're worried about progress 8, it's too late, actually, because, you know, progress 8 is, you know, that was history, wasn't it? What can you do with those? So there's some examples. I don't know what order you want to sort of talk this through, but there are some examples of that, of trying to get the school system working together and collaborating, that we can talk about, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that'd be really cool. Right. I'm really interested, actually. I think that'd be great for everybody. Did you ever find that government ever used data to sort of show that their initiatives are working, you know, or did you find that they just literally put policy in and then just expected education to make it work, as it were?
Well, I think to be honest, I think the DFE has improved with data. I don't know if you can see that purple bag behind me. This was a leaving present from my colleagues at Askell. I don't know, you can't read it. Shall I read it? So I've got a picture of it here, but it was an interview with Michael Gove back in 2012.
Oh wow!
From the Education Select Committee, giving him a good grilling, which is their job. It is a fascinating experience in Education Select Committee, by the way, in that every word you say is written down and ends up in Hansard, including the errs, and all of that. They all go in as well. But this sort of sums up, I think, where the DFE itself has been on a journey about data. So the question from the chair was, this is 2012, remember, if good, you know, as in Ofsted good, requires pupil performance to exceed the national average, and if all schools must be good, how is this mathematically possible? So Michael Gove's response, by getting better all the time. And the chair, so it is possible, is it? Michael Gove, it is possible to get better all the time. And the chair, were you better at literacy than numeracy, Secretary of State? Michael Gove, I cannot remember. So during my time at Askell, there was some, to be fair, there was some nonsense on how data was used, and I sort of saw it as my job at Askell to try and, you know, help members understand what is being given to them, but also to try and make sure that you know, that as best I could, that some of the things that the DFE were trying to do data wise was right and evidence-based and so on. And there's some interesting little examples. So, you know, it's where things are sort of politically driven, where the data doesn't back it up, that the things that I really know. It's not quite an answer to your question. I'm trying to think of an answer to your question, but, you know, sort of early on, for example, they had made a decision that dance and drama should be discounted as qualifications, which basically means that as far as they were concerned, they're the same subjects. You know, that you could be taught, they could be taught in the same time, and you'd get two for the price of one, as it were. So discounting is important, because I mean, clearly, if you did one maths GCSE with one board and another maths GCSE with another board, those should discount, obviously. But there was a decision about dance and drama, which I thought was absolutely egregious. So we sort of tackled that. And they reversed that decision before it hit. And art and photography as well. I remember saying to officials, well, you know, I'll take you down to see my previous heads of dance and drama, and if you say to them, you know, we think you can deliver both of these in the same amount of time, and you sort of come out alive from that discussion, you can have the piece of policy. But that was a good one. And there were plenty of other examples, you know, during the time of Progress 8 and how it landed, actually, where things that were wrong, you know, for example, this is a bit slightly more of an answer to your question, I suppose, but things like the impact of pupils with very low scores on Progress 8, you know, sort of zeros, the sort of statistical anomalies. I always hated calling them outliers, which is the right statistical word, but we're actually talking about pupils in a huge amount of difficulty, with lives that are all over the place and so on. So, you know, that as a policy, you can think what you like about Progress. There were things that were not quite right about it, and they did listen to that. So if they wanted Progress 8 to reflect the progress that schools make with their pupils, there were things they needed to fix. So I think my experience was that they certainly got better at listening to reason like that. But that's reminded me actually of the very first data. So I'm rabbiting, but the very first data thing that came onto my desk at Askell was a school that had been a language college, or was a language college at the time. And the data that was being sort of used, it was raised online then, was a sea of blue, which is bad, for modern languages. And of course, as it was a language college, you know, if it's got a sea of sort of negative indicators, then that was being used in the inspection to draw a very negative outcome about the school. But what wasn't understood at the time was that modern languages is a sort of special case, actually, of subjects, not like geography or history, really, because modern languages includes children who've got community languages as well. And if you look at the value added curve, I don't know which way around to draw this based on the screen, but value added curve should sort of start there and go up, shouldn't they? That's what they should do. Modern languages is bizarre because it sort of starts high and then goes sort of down and then is flat and then goes up very steeply. And that bottom bit is because of the effect of including community languages, you know, which is fine. That's not the issue. But the issue is those students who don't have a community language, that are learning French or Spanish, if you like, for the first time, with low prior attainment are sort of down there, but the average is up there.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of structural reason why, if your policy is everybody does a language, and this is still true, Nick, actually, it's still there in the data, it's still a live issue. If you want, you know, children with a lower prior attainment to do languages, the way value added is calculated at the moment basically mitigates against them doing well. So nobody knew that. So at the time, neither the Ofsted inspector nor the head knew that, and that was when I really thought there's a job of work to do here in educating everybody. I mean, I didn't know either, but I had to get stuck into the problem to try and support that particular head teacher. So you know, and then over time, more and more of that, with the help of some great people. You know, it's nothing to do with me really, but the help with some great people, some great insight. You know, from think of Mike from FFT and David Blow, who's a head in Surrey, who've been absolutely, you know, Mike Treadaway and David, between them, that's where I've learned my data actually, and it's those are the people that you should have here really. So they, you know, it's been a privilege to learn all of that from them. So that's not quite an answer, is it? But I think, you know, sort of I saw my role as trying to get, if the DfE did want to draw conclusions, it should have at least got the machinery, if you like, in its data as correct as possible.
So yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, well, it sounds like you've helped at least direct some of what they're thinking anyway.
Hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
Which is positive.
Yeah.
When you were in ASCL then, so you basically, you know, ultimately, you know, like you say, you were working with thousands of school leaders.
Yeah.
And ultimately looking at data as well. So it sounded like data was very important to you, you know, in ASCL as well. So yeah. just tell us a few bits about, you know, ultimately some of the initiatives and some of the sort of, sorry?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yes, that's right. I'm happy to do that. But so, so if we go back to that blueprint, then remember that what we were talking about was to sort of shift the balance between, you know, stuff being done to schools by government, to shift that away from schools actually taking the initiative to do some things. So there's yeah, looking back at, it's easy to look back at something, of doing periods of your life, and you think, oh right, there was sort of a pattern there, but of course it didn't really feel like that at the time. But if you go back to Progress 8 again, so and this really shows you the sort of the power of an ed tech provider alongside the policy environment and leaders. It does really marry those three groups together. But Progress 8 first landed for all schools in 2016, and they've been as a pilot, haven't they, the year before. One of the issues with Progress 8, and this is another membership issue, if you like, member support issue, was that if you take a value-added measure, one of the things you need to really understand about that is there's an average line each year, but that average line moves year on year, and it certainly did with Progress 8, because schools were busy putting more of their pupils in for EBAC subjects, for example, so it was moving the average up year on year. And there was a real risk that if you didn't grasp that, you might use last year's average and draw false conclusions. And again, I can remember another situation where that had happened, and a member getting himself into trouble by doing that. I mean, that's sort of one extreme where you know, where using last year's average was positively dangerous. But the other end of the picture, it's just a thundering nuisance. If you have kids and their results, which you do, you have your students' results on results day, which is fine, and then if the chair of governors says to you, well, how well have we done, even though you've got all the results there, the only answer you can give is, I don't know, because I've got to wait for everybody else's averages and so on to be calculated. But actually, you know, schools had almost all, well, they had the components of the answer between them, you know, which was pupils' prior attainment and the grades. All they needed was a bit of orchestration, if you like, and leadership, and they could work that average out for themselves, and they could do that in a couple of days, as opposed to waiting sort of 6 to 8 weeks for the DfE to do it. So am I allowed to talk about names of companies? I'm going to do it anyway, because they do. Is that all right? We're in an ed tech setting, aren't we? So, and it's not a secret anyway. But so I approached the good people at CISRA. Then, so CISRA had still has, I think, quite a large share of the market for storing assessment data. And we had that conversation that I've just sort of rehearsed with you. And because CISRA, you know, has got such a large market share, it would be great. It would have been great, I thought, if we could get their customers to say, well, all right, then you can use anonymously, because you don't actually need the names of the pupils. All you need to know is what their prior attainment scores were and what their, you know, attainment 8 scores were, and then average that out, and you can work out that average line. So we talked about that, and we sort of tested it out. Would it have worked last year? And And then we went out with it, as I supported CISRA by writing a letter, and it proved to be remarkably successful. So and CISRA always let us publish out to all of our members what those averages were. And that's a tangible example, isn't it, of schools working together with their data. This is the point I'm trying to make about collaboration actually as being a much more powerful form, and where I think in the long term we need to get to. So that was great. I mean, that came of a. I mean, we haven't had performance measures, have we, for a while? And the last time we had them, 2019, the DfE made some pretty large errors with publishing those averages, and we could call them out because that collaboration work was going on. So within 2 minutes of it coming out, my email inbox went mad. But we knew the DfE got it wrong. They'd left out some BTEC qualifications, I think, and ironically they'd mistreated GCSE statistics, which is quite funny with hindsight. It wasn't at the time, but the point is, because of that school-to-school collaboration, we'd done it better than the DfE had done. Again, that's a classic example of what that blueprint was talking about, isn't it? Government could in fact have not done it. The system could have done it itself, and did do it itself initially better, I suppose.
More efficiently, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, exactly, and certainly, yeah. So it's about whether the system can do the same thing but faster and accurately enough. I mean, I know, really, strictly speaking, you need all of the data. So the DfE at the moment is the only place that had those, but having enough schools working together would be enough. So that was, if you like, the sort of proof of concept in developer speak about whether school leaders would do that sort of thing. So, and I think the learning from it was, do they see why they're doing it? Can they see a clear purpose behind it? Workout progress is clear enough, I suppose. But also, do they trust the people who are involved with it? CISRA, a great company, and so on. So there was that. Hopefully, sort of at the ASCL brand, if you like, very well trusted and respected organisation, and so those two ingredients, I think, made that work. And of course, other providers do that now, do the same thing now, or they would do if we had any exams and stuff. But no doubt we'll get back to doing that later on. I think they are they are gathering the grades that schools are doing at the moment, I think, as well. So that was the first one. I'm waffling on here, Nick. Is this okay? But I think, that was an important step, I think, to show that the system can do this stuff if it wants to.
That's a quite question, though. So, did you get any initial sort of pushback from the school leaders? Was there any sort of like, no, actually, this is our data, you definitely can't touch it?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I wrote it. I think the approach I took in the letter that I gave to send out to their customers basically said, if it works, CISRA can have the glory, and if it fails, I'll take the rap. But it did mean that when this brave leadership, Nick, I suppose. Well, it's not that brave, because when the actual results came out and we'd said we are predicting this, a bit like predicting the outcome of a general election, you can get it wrong, you look pretty foolish. So I was pretty terrified the day the actual results came out, but it was amazing just how close they were. And as I say, schools have had those a couple of days after results rather than waiting 8 weeks. So I don't think so. I think it's that point about knowing why you're doing it. And then trusting the bodies involved. I think those are two essential ingredients.